So you're on, John.
Launched? Okay, good.
Uh,
First, let me express my appreciation for Ram and Sundri and Dave, who's not here, and I don't know, whoever else is involved in helping launch this thing. Yeah, Ram and I have been talking about this for a while, but the two of them, Ram and Sundri, finally twisted my arm to start writing about this stuff and then posting it online. So it wasn't something I was, how would I say? I was hesitant to do it, but nonetheless, I've started doing it, and I hope it adds to the whole conversation around Vedanta and psychotherapy, psychology, because there's a lot of I don't know, possible cross-pollination between the two things both ways. Vedanta adding to the practice of psychology, and psychology hopefully enhancing the practice of Vedanta. At least that's my intent. So without further ado, let me introduce myself. My name is John Baxter. I'm a retired psychiatrist living in Northern California. I don't know, for some reason, people thought it would be a good idea for me to talk about myself first, so that's what I'm going to do. I was raised in the Midwest, good, solid Christian middle-class family, and went to church every Sunday, had good parents, great childhood, have an older brother and one younger sister, and in the Midwest, for people, maybe some of the Europeans maybe know this or not, Americans, Midwest is kind of a solid sort of conservative culture, primarily Christian, mostly when I grew up, and a lot of people are defined by work, and it's really, that's kind of how you define your value when you grow up in the Midwest. My dad, when he used to call me, the first thing out of his mouth would be, "How is work going?" That's kind of how he thought you defined yourself as a person. So you get an idea of the culture, and that's kind of the way the Midwest functions. Anyway, I'm going to fast forward through my childhood because it's pretty white bread, not anything really outstanding. But then I attended a state college and then on to medical school. My mom, just to characterize me and my spiritual path, my mom described me as a happy baby, and my mom was a stern kind of Christian woman. She was fair-minded and extremely protective of her children, but she was quite stern, and I was kind of a funny and fun-loving guy, and so as you might imagine, we would frequently clash on things, and I suppose that trait continues to define me to this day. And then fast forwarding, when I got in college, I kind of got into the hippie anti-war scene. Even in the Midwest, there was a certain, that wasn't a common thing, but that's what I was doing. So I kind of buckled down. I wasn't a particularly good student in high school. I was more interested in having a good time, but then I buckled down, got good grades, got into med school. Again, kind of following my career as far as spiritual stuff. I got into it when I was in college. I got interested in Buddhism. That was kind of fashionable at the time, particularly in the hippie scene. And, the usual guys, how would I describe them? Alan Watts, Suzuki Roshi, Ram Dass, all these guys were popular in the day. And those kind of the first wave, at least as I was exposed to them. I got into med school. I was kind of immature and doing my hippie thing, and I quit medical school for several years, and then I went back to medical school and finished up. And there was kind of a growing interest in spirituality, mostly around Buddhism, which was what I was exposed to in those days. And then in the 70s, I moved to California. I actually went to a couple changes, but it ended up in psychiatry, and then finished a residency at UC Davis, where I currently live in Davis, California. And I met my wife, got married, adopted a child, and things were going pretty much according to plan until I got into my 50s. At that time, I kind of progressed up the Buddhist ladder, and I'd done primarily Japanese Zen Buddhism, Thich Nhat Hanh, some other people, and then along the way, I got into with the Trungpa group, with the Tibetan Buddhism, and I was sitting with those people for a while. And then I started following some Advaita teachers, a variety. In California, there's a guy named Adyashanti that's very popular. And but even I got far afield. There's a guy in Australia who's was a disciple of Nisargadatta. It's called Sailor Bob. Maybe some of you are familiar with him. And I got into a website with his and followed that bunch. And so anyway, so I'm following that. That's the spiritual side. And then I'm traveling along. I'm out running. I was a runner my whole life, and I have a pain in my leg, and I'm going, oh God, I thought I pulled a muscle. Well, it didn't get better. And then eventually it led to the diagnosis of stage 4 renal cancer. And stage 4 renal cancer is not a good thing. It was basically when the oncologist came to visit me, he said, you've got about a 5% chance of surviving for 5 years, and or 4 or 5%. I said, oh my God, I'm only 51 years old and I was always healthy. This is kind of threw me for a loop. So I had a couple major surgeries, kind of correct some of the problems. And then I at the time, stage 4 renal cancer didn't have anything else to offer. There was no chemo, no radiation, none of the stuff they do now. So, and I didn't want to just sit around and wait for the cancer to come roaring back. So I researched alternative treatments, and I was off to the Bahamas, and I went there for almost 20 years to an alternative clinic. The long and the short of it is, after 20 years now, or over 20 years now, I'm cancer free. But it was quite an ordeal. And then the second major challenge in my life, my son, in his mid-teens, he started to go sideways with drug use, and then that gradually evolved, unfortunately, to an addiction with heroin. And so this is a crazy struggle, because when I had cancer, I kind of felt like I was in control of it to some degree, but with my kid, he had felt completely out of control, and my wife and I struggled with it. We spent a fortune with rehabs and treatments and all this other stuff, but it just felt like a losing game. And at age 27, he overdosed and died. And
About the brain tumor.
what?
Brain tumor.
Yeah, it was something. Now, here's another part. Now this is a wonderful story. I'm being sarcastic, unfortunately, but then around the same time, and now I'm not yet exposed to Vedanta. I was still kind of following some of the neo guys, and I've developed. Then my son, this is how crazy it got. My son was in and out of rehabs. I now develop a brain tumor as a consequence of my original cancer. It metastasized in my brain. So I've got this whole thing going on. But so what happened was I for some reason, the part of my brain that was affected threw me into almost an altered state. And some of my friends, my Buddhist friends, thought, I actually wondered if I was, quote, enlightened. This is how crazy it got. And they would come to me because I was in this state where I was kind of living in the moment, so to speak. Nothing seemed to bother me. I was totally at peace and so forth and so on. The interesting thing about this is that as I was going through this, I recognized it was something that was going to come and go. And I treated the brain tumor, but it ultimately went. But in the process, I started thinking about what's going to happen when this can go, and what I could learn from what I was experiencing, oddly enough. And about the same time, then I was online. I'd kind of given up on the whole scene, right? I was going, oh God, enough is enough. I don't want to do this anymore. And lo and behold, I really didn't give up on it. I was still looking online at stuff. And I got on a website by a guy. His name is Dennis Waite. He's a Brit who runs this Advaita website, and it's called advaita.org, I think. And so I'm reading through this stuff, and lo and behold, somewhere in this thing, he says, if you're really interested in this stuff, there's a guy named James Swartz, and he's written this book called How to Attain Enlightenment. I said, oh man, that's a bold title. And I buy the book and I'm reading away and I'm going, suddenly I'm just hooked on this stuff. And then James had this, James was going to appear in Berkeley. And my wife had, we can tell this story. My wife had seen videos of him. She thought he was a little bit macho for her taste. And I know we were going, we were doing this. We said, okay, come on, play along with me. We're going to go down to Berkeley and see this guy. And I like what he's saying, and I want to see what he's doing. So she goes down there with me, and they have a conversation. And now she's hooked, and we're off to Trout Lake, in the fall. And my son's still completely spin out of control. He's alive at that time. So, and I'm trying to cope with this crap, and so is my wife. And lo and behold, perfect timing comes along as karma yoga, right? It was invaluable because I realized I did not control this thing. I was trying to figure out a way to desperately cope with this stuff, and the timing couldn't have been better. And so we go to Trout Lake, and gets better still. And then this is a weird irony. James was doing a workshop in Reno, so I said, well, let's run over to Reno. And my wife was in Texas at the time, and this is kind of the weird part. I come home, and something's amiss, and I feel like something's wrong. My son's in the house. I see his truck out front, and I go upstairs, and there he is. He's dead in the bathroom, right? And I discover his body, and my world falls apart. And so, it's kind of funny. This stuff arrived at the timing, oddly, was perfectly timed to help try to cope with this stuff. Most of you maybe have experienced when I was following the Buddhist path, but I was raised as a Christian, and so there's a lot of God stuff in that, as you know. And I was raised in a good brand of Christianity, which I consider a good brand, which is I was raised in more of a liberal part of the church, which was we went to a congregational church, and that church was mostly Christ's good news, as I understand it. It was the do unto others message, how to be a good person, basically. There was no talk about sin or hell or damnation or any of that stuff. So I didn't feel like it was anything for beneficial, but I strayed away from the whole God idea, because Buddhism, which I was kind of into, and you're smart, you're Buddhist, and suddenly you're an atheist, so to speak, right? You think only stupid people believe in God at some point, and then you kind of drift away from it, and then suddenly because Vedanta, it's a major piece of Vedanta, as you guys know, and it reintroduces it, and it makes complete sense now, and so it's like full circle. In some weird way, I appreciate my Christian upbringing, because it's like coming home in a certain sense. So anyway, let's see, I'm looking at my notes here, because my wife's here to keep me honest, because I have a tendency to wander around when I talk. So I'm trying to stay on topic here. So anyway, now that's kind of with all the crazy detours and stuff, that's kind of a little bit my history. And so let me kind of go now to the topic that we were supposed to discuss, I'm going to try to discuss, and that's Vedanta and psychotherapy primarily. Now, what happened was we had these conversations. James and I would have these conversations because I began to notice the resonance between psychotherapy and Vedanta as I practiced and understood it. In fact, I already had started incorporating some of Vedanta stuff into my practice. And I noticed it was reciprocal. The Vedanta complemented, Vedanta complemented psychotherapy. Psychotherapy had something to offer in Vedanta, another tweak, so to speak. So we started these conversations, and eventually it led to this conversation of, well, James kind of twisted my arm to say, you need to start writing this stuff down, and we'll put it on a blog and blah, 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 and then we'll write a book. And well, now we're getting really carried away, right? So I just started randomly writing stuff. I hadn't written anything since I was in college. I just started randomly writing ideas I had, and they seemed to make sense. And so I kept doing it. And then gradually we came up with this blog. let me talk about some of my ideas here. The first thing, I'm gonna digress a little bit. The first thing is I think, I notice that basically human beings we're narrative creatures, right? We live by stories. We tell stories about ourselves. We tell stories about politics, which is a total mess right now. We tell stories about we tell grand stories, foundational stories like the Bhagavad Gita and the Bible, the greatest story ever told, so to speak, or the Quran. I'm not that familiar with it, but people tell that story. Those are foundational stories, and then we tell stories about ourselves. We define ourselves by stories, and so why is that? Well, Vedanta has a pretty clear description of why we do that, or what the phenomenon of doing that. They label it, oddly enough, superimposition. Meaning we start with the core concepts of Vedanta, which is, as most of you guys know, is that statement of Brahman Satyas, what I'm blanking on it now. God damn it. Anyway, it's basically that Brahman is what's real. The world is apparently real, and the Jiva and Brahman are not different. So you take that idea, and what happens is you take the core essential things, which are Brahman, which we all know to be awareness, existence, and limitlessness, are always present. And then over that, we overlay a couple more things, name and form. We overlay a story basically onto the essential reality. And so Vedanta says that's the fundamental truth. And so now you try to discover what's the most essential thing, because the most essential thing is where you want to base your life, your identity, and everything. So then you're faced with this idea of what to do with the story. And Vedanta has a solution to that, of course. It's called Adiropa Apavada, basically, superimposition and negation. Now, what's that mean? Those are two interesting terms. Superimposition is basically the world's create this essential thing, and then you overlay a story on it. It's called an upadi, right? We all do it in a variety of levels, personally, as a world, and so forth and so on. And then, so to really get back to the essential component, you gradually, quote, negate the story. And negation is an interesting term because you don't really negate the story, you just substitute a better story, and then a better story, and a better story. So you keep taking your original story, whatever you start, and you keep substituting a better story. You negate the story and bring in a better story. Now, there's a lot of parallels now between Vedanta in that regard and psychotherapy, right? Okay, how's that work? I'm kind of digressing here. So now in my story, I just told you my story, right? For what it's worth, I mean, I did certain aspects of the story. People like to hear the cancer, you survive cancer part of it, because it's a heroic story, right? Everybody loves the ending. All my friends want to hear that story, but they didn't want to hear the original story when I got cancer. That wasn't such a great story. And they definitely didn't want to hear the story of my son's addiction, because that wasn't a great story. So we kind of prefer certain stories over others. And we all have a personal story, and so we're telling ourselves that, and a lot of that is we don't even know we're doing it, and even when we're told we're doing it, we tend to be inflexible because it's kind of scary to mess with that original story. And so it requires some real skill. Even in Vedanta, when you have this progression of stories, you start out with the basic stuff. First off, you got to be qualified, right? And that involves a lot of work for most people. And I kind of started to realize that to be qualified, you have to be psychologically healthy, right? You have to be able to control your feelings. You have to be not distracted by any number of things that distract all human beings. You have to be rational. and so forth and so on. It's almost like the definition of a healthy human being is to be qualified. So just to even get going on Vedanta, you have to possess these characteristics. But so I was thinking that, well, maybe some maybe some of the people to get qualified even started Vedanta could use some help with sort of psychotherapy type things, how to deal with some of these conflicts they have with their life. Maybe it's a personal conflict, maybe it's a trauma, maybe it's a marital conflict. And so, and there's a lot of similarities, meaning you in psychotherapy, you take your story. You when I first meet with someone, what's the first thing you have them do? They come into your office and they tell you their story, right? They tell you their history, they tell you, their what's going on in their relationships and so forth and so on. And then you take that and you try to develop some rapport with them by listening to their story and not immediately challenging it, because most people, that doesn't feel particularly empathetic if you do that. So you gradually creep in, and slowly but surely you start to ask questions, express some doubts, challenge the story a little bit, right? It's particularly if you're doing more of a rational cognitive therapy kind of format. They'll make statements and then you'll let them make the statement. You don't want to upset them too much, but then you'll start to say, well, maybe this is a better way of seeing things. And slowly but surely you try to shift the direction of the story. And then same way in Vedanta, you start out with stories. You start out with stories about the creation of the world, for instance. Panchikarna, this whole amazing scheme of how you have, this fundamental force, Brahman, and then somehow magically Maya comes along and overlays this story and develops all these parts and pieces and how they interact with one another. And that's one of the initial stages of Vedanta. And then you go into Panchadasi and you say, well, nothing ever happened. This story is just a story. This creation story really never happened. And so you kind of undo the original story, the Panchikarna story, and replace it with another one that's better still. And what you see is this progression where the stories get lighter and lighter and lighter and thinner until finally you get to the place where if you're in the non-dual realm, and there's, as you guys know, there's 3 realms. There's non-dual realm isn't really a realm. It's just we kind of refer to that because there's 3 things. And there's a worldly realm and there's a personal realm. Each of these has its own unique stories. In the personal realm, the Jiva realm, you have this idea that it's also, that's a subjective story. That's the dream world. That's the story that each of us have that we sort of make up and experience as we go along. And then the world story is just everything else, so to speak. And these stories overlay on one another, of course. But basically, when you're doing Vedanta, you're undoing both the personal and the worldly story. In psychotherapy, you're primarily undoing the Jiva story, the personals, the subjective story. The worldly realm is more of the, quote, objective story. You undo that, but it's not the same because you really don't, the world still exists and you still see it, but you just know it's a little more complicated than that. It's a little less real. So what happens is on the individual level, when you're working in psychotherapy, you're working in the personal realm. You're working almost completely in the Jiva realm. You're just challenging people's subjective realities. But it has enormous value because everything in Vedanta is, and everything in the human experience is filtered to the Jiva. So if the Jiva isn't clear on what it is or who it is, it's going to add layers of distortion to every other level. And you see that all the time. People haven't worked out their stuff. They want to, unfortunately, jump into sort of a spiritual idea themselves. They haven't worked out their stuff. And then that and invariably will contaminate their understanding of the next levels of things. And so people get what's called enlightenment sickness. They do spiritual bypassing, if you guys are familiar with those concepts. But then they struggle, and then they get many times they get discouraged. You know, they want to quit. You know, because it's not getting them where they want to go, because they're not dealing with their own individual Jiva story, so to speak. And that's where I think when psychotherapy can really enhance, and maybe some of you guys have experience with that, can really enhance the whole Vedanta experience, because ideally you say, you know, I've got some stuff going on here, maybe some past traumas, maybe I'm not getting along with my husband or wife or whatever it is, that I need some help with it. And while Vedanta can definitely support and enhance all that, it may not deal with it in the direct way that, say, cognitive behavioral therapy or marital counseling will do. So, or even honestly, even a medication for some people that are severely, you know, have severe mental health issues and may need the help that way. So is to try to, you know, I think about this because I saw people when I went to the workshops. I said, you know, they seem to understand these Vedanta concepts, but there's a way they seem to not be dealing with their own personal stuff. And I think, you know, even I remember Sundry wrote that amazing satsang called the Durodhana Factor, which kind of addresses the same point. It's like you possess all this knowledge and you know, but somehow you still have this piece that's acting in ways that just aren't in your best interest, or even blocking your complete understanding of Vedanta. By the same token, you put, if you throw in guna yoga and karma yoga and all these different things into a psychotherapy practice, they provide a basis that you can, just for mental health in general, that help you actually have the courage to confront some of these things. So again, I'm kind of drifting about here. I hope I'm making sense. Let me see what else okay, so you refine your stories. Here's one of the ironies. None of the stories are true. All the stories contain truth and some element of truth and some element of falsehood. Now, interesting, you come in with the Upadi thing, and you come in with these stories, many of which you may arrive with because of your karma, or you come in because your culture or your parents or whatever it is, and they're problematic for you, and they're creating problems in your life. Ironically, the solution to the story, the solution to the bad story, is a better story typically, right? In psychotherapy, that's primarily what we do. In cognitive behavioral therapy, the forefather of that was a guy named Albert Ellis. He invented this therapy called rational emotive therapy. He basically came out of he borrowed a lot of traditions. He borrowed the Stoics tradition, and the Stoics were an interesting bunch of Greek philosophers that basically had the idea that, you know, kind of like the Shakespeare line, nothing is good or bad, but thinking makes it so, right? So it's not the events in your life that are a problem, it's the way you think about them. So he adopted a lot of these concepts and invented this thing called rational emotive therapy, which was kind of the forerunner of cognitive behavioral therapy. But I saw a lot of parallels between this and say qualifications, you know, being dispassionate, being you know, discerning, and so forth and so on. These are kind of Stoic principles, so to speak. And so there was these parallels between cognitive therapy and what Vedanta was encouraging people to think through stuff, you know, the rational, logical analysis of your experience, and the whole emphasis on thinking clearly and thinking through stuff. So, for instance, in cognitive therapy, you make the statement, nobody loves me, you know, blah, blah, blah. And the standard, you know, catch-all statement. And then you try to introduce the concept, well, is that completely true? Because I think some people love you and some people don't. So there's a better story that you introduce with people. In Vedanta, you do the same thing to some extent. You take a story called karma yoga, for instance, and you say, you're operating with a story that there's no God in the universe, there's nothing you're supposed to do to support that understanding. And I think this is a better story here. This one about God, it's closer to the truth, and it's likely to make you feel more at one with things, more peaceful, and so forth. So, but at some point, Vedanta, if you go to the non-dual realm, there's no stories in that realm. The stories are, because it's impossible to have a story in a non-dual realm. So, but you take the stories, you take a better story to actually be able to approach the story. I'm going to say something crazy here, to approach a place where stories aren't necessary. You can have a story or not have a story, but you're not tied to your stories. To use Buddhist language, you're not attached to your story. You just, you're free to have it. You're free to not have it. There's no arguing about it. It's just like, okay, this seems to be a convenient story. It makes me happy. I'm going to do it for a while. Or more importantly, you're not so attached. You can't challenge some of these things, these all your sacred beliefs, about this and that. So anyway, I don't know if I'm making any sense here, but basically there's these two realms, right? I guess there's a Vedanta realm, the psychological realm, but you can see that, at least in my mind, there's a lot of overlap. And I'm not necessarily going in my blog into the specific techniques of psychotherapy. Maybe sometime I'll do that, but it's more like just to see that there's no conflict between the two realms. And sometimes it feels like, one of the things I feel like sometimes I've run into in the spiritual community, people will poo-poo the psychological realm. Or I know people in more atheist types, if you will, in the psychological realm, they'll think spiritual stuff is just woo-woo. It doesn't have anything to offer me. And I think the dialogue between the two is really, really helpful, could be really helpful, really fruitful, like Ron was saying earlier. So that's what I'm trying to write about a little bit in my thing. And some of the Vedanta concepts, I mean, like I say, my own life, karma yoga came into play. Guna yoga, I think most people are already doing guna yoga to some extent. We all are managing our lives, and we probably already have adopted guna yoga without calling it that, concepts into our lives. It's just more of an organized, focused format of it. And some of the other stuff that's more challenging, more the jnana yoga stuff, that's I don't think psychotherapy, in all honesty, touches that, but it could enhance. I think that those concepts could greatly enhance the psychotherapy, because you're able to have conversations with people sort of free from heavy-handed opinions about stuff. And there's a lot of, unfortunately, I'm an equal opportunity critic, and I see a lot of what goes on in the psychotherapy realm that I'm not crazy about, because it fosters dependency and it's kind of has heavy-handed opinions, and I don't think it's helpful. But that's a whole nother conversation. But anyway, so let me take a look at my notes real quick, because I kind of wandered about. And okay, so the take-home message is, just, you guys are already doing it if you're doing Vedanta, but don't be afraid to look at, maybe likely some of you have been in counseling, or maybe you're on medication, I don't know, but don't be afraid to share those experiences too. And because I think it'd be helpful how you've been able to blend those things together, and or maybe you've had terrible experiences with psychotherapists, so you have some good critique to offer, which is good too, one way or the other. But I see a lot of common ground, and so I don't know. That's about it, I guess, huh?
Yeah, cool. Can they still hear me?
Beg your pardon?
Can people hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, yeah, okay, good. Yeah, if anybody has some, really good, John.
Thank you. I hope I
Excellent.
haven't wandered about too much. My mind kind of goes this way and
Well,
that.
listen, you did a lot better than I did the first time I did the step. I'll tell
You
you.
know, I'm not used to lecturing. I'm not a lecture guy. So my whole career was based on dialogue, right? Conversation. I try to see where people are confused or straight or whatever, and then address that kind of specific thing. So just to talk generally about one or, talk about topics is kind of not my thing. So anyway.
Originally, the Vedas were never given like lectures.
Right.
It was all one-on-one. And
That makes sense to me.
yeah, the Brahmins used to send their kids to the number one son, sometimes number two son. They'd send them to live with the guru. And so it was just a natural thing. So the guru actually, it was just the father really there, who just talked with the kids in the course of their daily life. And the kids were served in the guru's home, basically.
Mhm.
So it was just a natural conversational thing. This whole thing that I do, like talking to groups and all that sort of thing,
Yeah.
that came much later. And
Yeah.
it became debates and that sort of thing, that were really big public events and so forth and so on, as more and more people got interested, or understood what spirituality is, and they wanted to talk about it, and they developed these systems around it and so forth and so on.
Yeah. Well, this whole thing, yeah, it just, but we have to face reality, and I'm looking at a whole grid of stuff here, with people's faces and that. That's the way we're communicating these days.
Well, it's hard to know what people are thinking. Actually, that's when you're
Yeah.
talking, you can't really, you don't really have time to look at that, listen. They're not responding immediately, so you can't tell by the inflection of their voice, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, which you can in person, or or one-on-one. You can actually record their gestures, their body language, their inflections, so forth and so on. So,
Well, I hope eventually I get to meet many of you and just talk in a normal way,
yeah, well, you're going to be at Trout Lake, right? So many of
I'm
them.
in Trout Lake, and then I'm thinking about going to this. Well, we're coming to that thing in Bali for those of you that may be attending that.
Oh,
so.
yeah, that's filled up now. That's we got all of the vendors spoken for. Here, Peru said, "Great talk, John. Can you let's see what, just a minute here. They're piling on here, John."
Okay.
So,
On the spot.
can you translate karma yoga into cognitive behavioral therapy terms?
Oh, cognitive behavioral. Okay. Let's see. Karma yoga. Well,
Yeah.
karma yoga is so here. Let me translate in slightly different terms. Here's a conclusion I've drawn. A lot of people struggle with the karma yoga thing. I think, I know smart people don't like the God idea, I think, to some extent. Maybe I'm generalizing here, but what happens, I find, is when people get into jnana yoga, particularly smart people, I'm myself included, you'll start to that'll really promote your spiritual ego. If you're a smart guy, you understand these concepts and you're off and running. And if you don't have karma yoga to say, hey man, you're not all that, you're second fiddle to God. You need to keep your ego in check here, bud, because it runs out. And I see a lot of this in spiritual community, a lot of really smart people who get run away with spiritual ideas, but they're not grounded, right? And how I translate this as rational mode therapy, you need people are inherently narcissistic. It's just what human beings do. We create a world in which we're the center of it. And it's nothing wrong with it per se, but we can get carried away with it. But the karma yoga end of it, when we have to say, okay, I have to express gratitude. I have to, take everything as prasad. I have to do these 5 things, which basically are serving humanity, serving God, serving the script, so forth and so on. You guys all know this stuff. They put your feet on the ground. And in that way, rational motive therapy should put your feet on the ground, right?
Yeah.
I think some of these spiritual ideas could be very ungrounding for people, right? And I've noticed that a lot of people even resist karma yoga because they want to spin off into the stratosphere with these spiritual ideas because they're so amazing at times and then they start to somehow that pumps their ego up. And I'm not against the ego guy, because you need one to function in the world. You need a functional story, but you also need something to ground you. And I think Ram could speak to this because he deals with this every day with people, but a lot of people karma yoga, that's great, blah, blah, blah. But they don't,
They don't do it.
They don't do it.
Well, honestly, John. So let me interject if I may.
Yeah, where are you?
Really,
Peruse, there you are. Can I see your
hey,
face
man.
on your camera, man?
Sure. I don't know. I don't know if you'd like to see my face, but I will. Hold on. a
Oh,
second.
yes, I do. You're a good-looking guy. Come on.
Yeah, you'll see me in Trout Lake. So
There you go.
so
Hi.
hey, baby. So a lot of that really, I had never heard of karma yoga term, and just like you, I grew up, in a religious family, a Muslim.
Okay.
By birth. So all of that sort of got imprinted in us as we grew up
Yes.
in a religious
Yes.
family. So then you come to a spiritual, but then at some point I renounced all organized religion because I
I
realized.
know. Welcome to the club.
Right. Then this term karma yoga confused the Jesus out of me. And it's like, so is this something different that what has been taught to me all along and been imprinted in my mind all along, that look, you stay humble, you stay respectful, you stay grateful. That's the 3 things. Basically, that's what you don't, there's a God. You do bad, you get punished. You do good, you will get,
Yep.
So in that term, this karma yoga term had always been. I told Ramji this last week. I'm the first one who, when I hear karma yoga, was like, what the hell is that now? I mean, is this something that is not different and specific to somebody who's in the spirituality and understands a bit of non-dual knowledge and wisdom?
Right.
And when you say runaway and this enlightenment sickness thing, so does that translate into what? I mean, I think that the more someone learns this, the more they become mute and human, and they get humility. They don't want to rise their neck up anymore.
Yep.
So is that opposite of enlightenment? Is that scaring or being or going away from understanding of this non-dual wisdom and the fruit of it? Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Yeah. Well, let me see. Let me see if I understand you. If you go into karma yoga, you're moving away, or if you're going into jnana yoga, you're moving.
And I'm talking about karma yoga in a way to keep the person grounded from becoming a runaway train,
Yes.
But at the same point, one could say that will be a learned helplessness approach, whereby you are not affecting anything.
Okay, I think I think it's actually the opposite. I think if you see, and I don't know what a Muslim God looks like, but a Christian God is almost an entity, right?
Very similar. Some do.
It's the same Abrahamic tradition, right? It's an entity. Ishvara is not an entity.
Mm-hmm.
It's like nature. It's a system of dharma and karma. It's a system of rule and order that everybody can observe around them. Order. And if you understand it, meaning if you understand karma, which is basically related to dharma, meaning the rules and order to thing, and you figure it out so your life is aligned to that, right? Your life is congruent with what the nature of things, so to speak. Your life is going to go way the hell better because you're going to live in accordance with, I don't know, it's hard to find terms, but nature, not because some entity is going to punish you or reward you. It's just, you could look around, you can see there's an order to this thing. And if you live your life in something congruence with that, it's going to go a hell of a lot better. It's empowering to believe, I don't know, am I making sense here? It's actually empowering. Karma empowers you. It doesn't make you some dependent fool, at least that's the way I conceptualize it. But at the same time, you do have a humility because you realize you're part of the whole, but you're a part, and you got free will, at least on the Jiva level, and you're responsible for your decisions, and your decisions have to ideally align you with the order of things. It could be a social order, it can be just the nature of the universe. And the more you're aligned with that, then likely your karma, which is the results of your actions, will be congruent with everything that is.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I don't know if I'm describing this very well.
I maybe could put something into this.
Okay.
Because karma yoga is two things: is attitude and action.
Right.
So the attitude is basically, that's an essential part, and that attitude is an attitude of awareness of otherness, of not me. It's a spirit of sacrifice and service. Like Piruz is a doctor. Well, you're a doctor,
right?
You're a servant. You want to be a good doctor, you've got to serve the patient.
Mm-hmm.
So you got karma yoga built in right there, assuming that it's a genuine feeling from your heart that you want to help people. This is a person who needs my help, and I'm here to offer. So so basically it's the spirit of service and sacrifice. But the problem is when you go to the Vedanta side, what happens? That's all about me.
Right.
Right? Huh?
Right.
You see, you lose the otherness becomes meanness.
Right.
Oh, this is incredible. This is fantastic. I'm invited. And off you go, building up the me again. But
if I may interrupt you, Ramji, but remember, I asked you this before. Ultimately, if you understand Vedanta, it is a solipsistic way of knowledge. It ultimately it is solipsism with a capital S, not the little me.
Yeah.
Is that not correct?
No, let me say that again. I didn't understand that. It's a solipsistic system,
Ultimately, if the non-dual wisdom translates into solipsism with capital S.
Yeah, there's only me, but that
not the little me.
That's right. That me includes all the little
everything. It includes everything, everybody, and everything that exists. Period.
Everything, yeah. So it's a weird thing, isn't it? Yeah,
it sure is, and that
you're the center of the universe because you're the only thing that exists.
Right.
But that thing is everything. So you cross some line there in which, but I don't know. It's a tough one because you see all these guys. I mean, all the quote fallen gurus, so to speak, they all fall into this trap, and these are smart people, and they have spiritual insights. It happens repeatedly if they don't have something that grounds them. And this is where karma yoga, I think, comes into play. Just that idea that, like Ram was saying, you're responsible to something other than yourself, and you're part of something
bigger.
I don't know. Human beings fall. Smart people think they're not going to fall into this trap, and then they do over and over again.
Yeah, you're too clever
So,
by half.
I mean, I don't know, Rama, you're obviously you know all this stuff and you're a smart guy, but you must, I assume karma yoga keeps you from falling into the trap. I don't know, maybe, or maybe you got insights that that's not a trap for you anymore.
Did you read my blog, The 7 Steps of Healing today?
No,
I did.
haven't.
Yeah, I did. It was,
Huh?
it's good. Yeah, it was very good.
Yeah,
What did you say?
well, you're just a normal person doing normal things. So this is about recycling.
Right,
Mhm.
right.
So I was telling about my recycling experiences, and you know, and just being a normal person. Now, am I modeling, you know, how to do this, and this has nothing to do with me, or am I just a normal person doing normal things and pissed off at people, you know, throwing plastic in the world? Am I a cranky old guy? Well, you know, am I a Greta Thunberg? You know, that this humorless, you know, scold, you know, or you know, taking a stand as a normal person and living like a normal life. That's the grounding. Knowing at the same time that
Yeah.
you know, this is all just a big story. You know,
Right, right.
God's a big story and the world's a big story and all of that. You know, in the non-dual realm, as you point out, it's not a realm. There's no stories. There's just awareness. I'm just aware.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is, I mean, I assume Peru's your product of the same system I was, a medical training system, and you get rewarded. You're a smart guy. You're rewarded your whole life for being the smartest guy in the room. It's deadly, you know, and then you come to spirituality and you still want to be the smartest guy in the room. And I'm going, oh my God. Well, you know, I don't want to do that anymore. And so let God be the smartest guy in the room. You know, I don't.
He wanders on not to another topic here, John, and I think it's interesting. And can you talk about the acceptance of situations in one's life and the learned helplessness principle that is talked about in psychology?
Learn helplessness. Okay, what is that? I mean, oh God, you know, that's another story, by the way.
I'm sorry, guys. I got 2 other questions. So sorry. We can do this some other time. Let other people get in.
Yeah. Well,
You can answer my second question later.
You coming to Trout Lake?
This is, huh?
Yeah. We'll talk in Trout Lake.
Well, to be continued.
To be continued. Yeah.
That's the whole point. I want, you know, this could be fun. These conversations. What was it? Learn helplessness. Okay, let me ask you what they mean by learn helplessness. What's that story? Describe it to me.
So what I would say is inability to affect the environment through negative reinforcement that you've seen, or inability to affect the environment, your environment, by knowing something else is controlling it.
Okay, so how is that created? How do you feel that's created? How do you create?
That's the God principle. That's the you know, the God principle that, look, and that's what I have always operated on. Granted, I have made decisions.
Okay.
However, ultimately,
okay.
God,
that's exactly what I'm trying to say.
Okay. So the helplessness is God's in control and you don't have anything to say about it.
Yeah.
Right.
Kind of thing. Okay. Well, is that true?
As a jiva.
The jiva, is that true?
Yes. I think so.
It is and it isn't.
Here's the interesting. It's both true and untrue. God's in control.
Correct.
But you got a lot to say about it. I mean, if you didn't, Vedanta would be a big fat waste of time because you got to do it, right?
True.
God doesn't make you do it. If you don't do it, nothing happens. So
God can't do God's job unless you're doing something, because God relies upon you to like put input into the system, and He's the one that, you know, pushes the button that sends it back. So
here's the other problem: is God only makes recommendations. You recommend to do
Mm.
5 things. He doesn't demand you do it. You see a whole bunch of people out there that aren't doing it, right? So
Yes.
he just makes
Yeah.
suggestions. God says, hey, I think you'd be better off if you do these 5 things. You might want to find out for yourself and try them and this and that. I mean, it's not, if he made people do it, if he was in control, so to speak, in control, if it was an entity in control, everybody be doing it, because why not? God would say, this is good for you, do it anyway. But you don't see that happening. You see people struggling with it and trying to make up their minds about it, all the standard human stuff. So, just maybe look at it, all this stuff is, depending on what you tell yourself, you may or may not do it. You could say ultimately God's in control because he put all this stuff in your head to begin with, and there's some truth in that. But it's kind
Well,
of
then he gave you free will, which means
that's
that he's
right.
not in
You
control.
got
So,
free will, and you don't have to do it if you don't want to.
so there's
You
all
know?
kinds of little problems with all these stories.
Yep.
Here,
You
Ruth
know-
has got one. Ruth says, she says,
Yeah.
Jung and Hillman were well versed in the Vedas. She says,
Yeah. In
And-
fact, even Albert Ellis, he primarily was into the Stoics, and the Stoics are an interesting bunch, but because they were into this kind of rational, shall we say, a dispassionate approach to life. But he also studied Confucius and Buddha. These guys were some of these smart guys were just taking ideas from all over the place. The only guy that didn't was that I'm aware of as the godfather of psychoanalysis, Freud. Freud was an atheist, right? That was his big falling out with Jung. Jung believed in God. Jung was a Christian.
Yeah.
And so, he didn't have that. His cosmology, his psychotherapy didn't include spirituality whatsoever. And of course, everybody knows about Jung, so that dimension is not in his thinking, so to speak. It's kind of a lack as far as I'm concerned. But I mean, he provided enormous contribution in terms of unconsciousness and the way families and mothering and all this stuff affects people, but it has all those limitations because he didn't include the spiritual realm, which is, again, I think a huge deficit, so.
Yeah. And then Ruth says, if Vedanta saved me when I didn't have any reason to go on living, it provided a way for me to heal my heart. Thank you for your story. So
Yeah, well, that's a whole thing. I mean, let me tell you, of all my psychiatric training, right? When I got cancer, guess what I was repeating myself? This is pre-Vedanta, by the way. I was doing the Lord's Prayer. I was repeating the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd. It provided me enormous comfort during that time in my life, right? So, I mean, that's why it all works together, right? And at some point, whatever. So
they're just universal principles that are
known. And people make fun of people because they're this or that, but it's ridiculous, really. It's a kind of a failure to just be able to see the truth of some of this stuff, and it's the old saw that God, there's no atheist in foxholes, right?
There's
The
no
bombs are
atheist
cool.
in foxholes.
They're
Yeah,
praying
that's
to
right.
God that they're surviving.
Damien says, John, thank you. You're a humble man and real. Vedanta's real too, not a bunch of hot air.
I hope so. I definitely have hot air.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, and Ruth says you should put up a booth at Trout Lake.
I figure the way Sundry and Ram are pushing me, they're going to push me to be on stage at some point, which is going to be a whole nother thrill.
TED Talk.
TED Talk.
Michelle says, great talk. Are you familiar with the work Ken Wilber is doing with the integral psychology? I haven't heard that name for a long time. He doesn't talk about Vedanta, but the concepts overlay. He talks about doing shadow work, which sounds like Duryodhana concept. Can you speak about shadow work?
Yeah, Ken Wilber. Wow. My good friends is staying with me right now, and he was familiar with Ken Wilber and introduced me way back when. He had the book. God, what was the name of the book, Rick? Do you remember? He had the book that basically took all the levels, spiritual, psychological, and fused them into kind of one gigantic schema, which was really, really interesting at the time.
He was an avid dog guy, right?
Structured consciousness, he called it, right?
Spectrum.
What?
Spectrum.
Spectrum of consciousness, right? He had, but and some good ideas in there. Unfortunately, like a lot of these guys, really smart guys with a lot of spiritual insights, Ken's got a big ego, and he kind of got a little spun out in his later days, right? So it's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. I think really smart guys putting together some really interesting spiritual ideas, but some of their personal stuff was never dealt with. And the shadow work is kind of a fancy Jungian work for just being willing to look at stuff you don't want to look at, right? Stuff that's painful, some of your shortcomings, some of the ways you're confused or in doubt or frightened or whatever, things that make you anxious, and be willing to be honest with yourself, right? It's not an easy thing for humans to do. We want to feel safe, we want to feel comfortable, and that's not comfortable. And that's why most of us need, that's why psychotherapy sometimes comes into play, because you need somebody you trust who makes you feel safe and kind of help guide you through that process. But it's not absolutely necessary. Some people are able to do that on their own, self-help type things, so yeah, shadow, yeah, the Duryodhana shadow, you can see what happens when you don't look at that stuff. It's gonna come in through the back door.
Yeah.
And it's going to wreak havoc with your life,
It's really hard though. It's really hard because it contradicts your own good opinion of yourself. And everybody basically has this story about how wonderful they are. And so they don't, they just really, to get into it and say, I'm not such a wonderful guy after all. I'm not so holy and righteous and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, as I think. That takes a lot of courage to do that.
It's courage, and hopefully, though, at some point, you're able to turn the corner and you say, there's a lot of freedom in just admitting that stuff. It takes a tremendous load off your shoulders. You don't have to pretend. Most of us sense that something's not right. You're being dishonest somehow, right? You're creating some kind of an image of yourself, and there's a lot of work in doing that, and you get tired of it, and you just want to go, oh God. And fortunately, as you get old and you start not giving a shit, it's a little easier to do for some people, but some people just double down and say, oh, I don't know. In fact, here's a funny story. When I got cancer, I started to go through this crazy reasoning process where obviously I wanted to survive. I do everything to survive. So I started to look at things I was doing, things that I always done, because I'm kind of a pleaser and I like making people happy and I like making people laugh. I still do. But what happened was I was in a profession that didn't work a lot of the time, and I would just get upset about it internally, right? And so that created stress in my life. So at some point I made a couple decisions. One of them was I was never going to get angry again. Isn't that weird? That's weird, right? Who does that? I just said, I can't have this energy in my body if I'm going to survive this damn cancer. So I just made that weird decision. More or less, I've stuck with it over the years. And then I made another decision. I said, I was with people, and for those of you who've worked in the field, you get with people, and no matter what you do, they don't like you. They just don't like you. They don't like what you say, like you say it. They just don't like you. And that was very upsetting because I like people to like me. So what happened was I get to this point where I was working with people, and it just dawned on me, because this is stressful. I'm trying to get everybody to like me. And so at some point I said, you know what, this doesn't make sense. And if I'm who I am and doing what I do, some percentage of people aren't going to like me. It's just the way of things. And so I just said, okay, it's okay for you not to like me. And it kind of, I know it sounds kind of simplistic and strange, but it was incredibly freeing for me. And so when people didn't like me, I had a gal come in. She came in, this is after I made this decision. She came in and she was just dealing me a raft of shit. Nothing I could say or do. She was just angry, angry, angry. And I just kind of did a 180 at that point. I said to her, I said, you know, I don't think this is going to work. She says, what? What do you mean? What do you mean? I said, I don't think I'm your cup of tea. I said, you know, I'd be glad to help you find somebody else. I don't think anything I say or do. And she did a 180. Suddenly she's very nice to me because the way I spoke, because you know, somehow I changed the game, and that wasn't my intent. I was just to this place where you know, I'm not going to try to push the river here. You're not going to like me. That's okay. That's okay with me for you not to like me. And that was a radical departure from the way I used to run. So it's kind of like, you know, you can do that kind of stuff once you become aware of it. It's hard to do because it's so ingrained, you know, for me to want people, for instance, to be happy and like me and kid around and have fun and stuff. That's just what I do. And but some people just don't resonate with that style at all. In fact, it offends them. I had people when I was with them and I'd be trying to kid around and lighten the situation. They get pissed off at me because I wasn't taking them seriously. And of course, when you're in psychotherapy, you're supposed to be very, very serious, right? So it's like, oh my God, I don't even want to do this if I've got to do that because it's so antithetical to my character, right? So I finally decided I don't have to do it. I'm going to do my version of this, and some people are going to like me and some people aren't. And hopefully the people who like me are going to gravitate for me and everything's going to work out. And I don't know. That's a funny story, I suppose.
Hey, John, I got one here from Georg. He said, does a jnani have post-moksha sadhana? Does sadhana stop for a jnani?
No. No, I don't think it does. You know, people, you did that 5, 10, 15. I do 5, 10 infinity. What are you gonna do?
Yeah, what are you gonna? That's
what the hell else are you gonna do? Why do you even contemplate that question? To me, that's like the stupid karma question. What am I gonna come back as? Oh, who cares? You're not whatever. Come back as whatever you want to come back as. You know, it doesn't matter. You know, if you're really not invested in the story, I mean, really, any story is okay, right?
He said,
I mean, that's not exactly true. They're horrible stories, right? So
he says, does karma yoga continue for a jnani? And well, karma continues for everybody till the day you die. So karma yoga is the best way to deal with karma, I'd say.
Well, I say too. I mean, if you're a jiva, you're going to have a story. That's karma by definition. So just have a nice story. Don't make it too complicated. Have an ordinary, simple, nice story.
Here, Leonic says, John, can you explain how to use psychotherapy as a tool to qualify as a proper Vedanta? To put it in, to put you in context, I tried psychotherapy a couple of times in the past, since 2 members of my family are manic depressive, and one of them has a serious problem with drugs also. But always I've tried to do therapy. I finished with the feeling that it's not a priority for me. And I think my situations are temporary and not real. I think that's thanks to my father, who taught me since I was a kid about the relativity of circumstances and the seeds of atheism, philosophy, and theosophy he put in my core since I was little. But can physiotherapy I think she means psychotherapy, maybe not. But can physiotherapy introduce certain tools to jiva without feeding the identification with the situation or the jiva's trauma in the self? Where's the line between psychological healing and ego feeding?
Ego feeding. Okay, I'm not too sure what that means, but let's just keep it simple. If you've got, cognitive behavioral therapy is basically you've got a story. Your story is rotten. It's not, you're unhappy, right? And then you start to challenge elements of it. It's no different in Vedanta that way. You could come in with a story. And typically you come in with a spiritual story. Maybe you come from Christianity, Buddha, whatever. And then suddenly you want to correct that. You get a better story. It's called Vedanta or whatever. So same way in life, you're always going to have a story. As an individual, you're not going to be storyless. It's like the world doesn't disappear just because you're even enlightened. It's still there. You still have to deal with it. So, cognitive therapy simply says what you think and how you behave can be more or less a better or worse story, so to speak. So
I think
what?
I think what you want too is a therapist who doesn't stoke.
Oh, okay.
trauma.
Let me.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to backtrack here a little bit. The therapy community is a minefield. There's a lot of shitty therapists out there. They're just selling you stuff. Sometimes creating dependency. It's a tricky deal. It's like a lot of it's like a lot of spiritual things. There's a lot of hucksters out there.
Yeah.
And it's tough because so keep it focused. Here's what I'd recommend. If you're going to go see somebody, first off, find out how they do stuff. If they aren't practical and down to earth and seeming sensible, meaning they're helping you provide you with strategies, just like Vedanta does, on dealing with whatever life. Let's say you have problems with your marriage, you're not getting along, and there are ways of behaving in a marriage that are more or less healthy or not. I mean, I used to get people to come to me for marital counseling, and they'd say, "Oh God, you this or that," and I'd say, "Listen, I don't know what to tell you, man. I know what it takes to have a good marriage. I happen to be in one. I've been in one for over 40 years, but I don't think you're going to listen to me because you think you know how to have a good marriage, even though you're here because yours is rotten." So it's kind of funny how people will argue with you that way, but they'll just go, "Oh, well, you're so arrogant. You're so this or that." I said, "No, why are you even here if you don't want to take whatever I have to say about it?" But that's just the way it is. People get stuck with their ideas. But if you're willing, first off, you have to be going with an open mind, but you have to go in with in my mind, particular situations you want to address, not just some vague, I think something's wrong. And then obviously the therapist should help define what's wrong with your story. You're off here. This isn't, you're thinking about it this way. How about thinking about it this way? And so it should be very kind of grounded and practical. It shouldn't be a lot of some of the therapists, because there's always new techniques and new styles being developed. They'll actually, this is a common, almost, how would I say, this is almost cliche. Therapists are more screwed up than their clients, right? And they're solving their problems with clients. And unfortunately, some of them are, so.
Stoke the trauma too.
Yeah, they'll stoke the trauma. There was a period of time when there was repressed memories. They talk people into having been abused as children when there weren't, because you don't know. I'm picking it up in what you're saying and doing that you have repressed your memories of how you're abused as a child, and so they stoke trauma sometimes. And then they
what if you have been abused,
well, if you have been abused, you should know it.
Well,
I mean,
you need a therapist to help you.
Yeah, and some obvious traumas like people have when they go to war or they involve in some scenario where they've been attacked or something. There's a variety of things they can do. They're very practical. I'm a fan of doing practical things over a short period of time if possible, right? Like if you see the trauma therapies, there's stuff called EMDR and trauma therapies, exposure therapies. They're time limited. Cognitive therapy typically is. They're not open ended, meaning they never end, and they create an income stream for the therapist. And unfortunately, they foster dependency in ways that aren't necessarily healthy. If you look at, unfortunately, I'm not a big fan, although there's a lot of truth to it, for transference-based therapies. What's transference? Transference is basically this idea that, that you project these parental things on other people and then live them out. So as a therapist, you're in the room, they're going to project their bad parent or good parent onto you. Maybe they idealize you, or they critical or negative towards you, and then you help them sort that out. There's value to that, but unfortunately, there's also some major pitfalls to that. So I'm kind of long-winded here about as a consumer, it's like anything else. You need to know the pros and cons of anything you're engaged in, and that's difficult because that's not readily advertised, unfortunately. And so I became more recommending people, come in, try something. You should see results in some reasonable length of time, hopefully a matter of weeks. And you can pursue it if it continues to be helpful. But if you just are wandering around talking about, your life, and it doesn't seem to be going anywhere, which is a lot of therapy, by the way, then maybe you ought to do something else, So I don't know.
That's a good answer, John. That's great. Hey, sorry, they're jockeying to get into this conversation so my chat thing's hopping around, and Gabrielle just told me that I ignored her, and she wants to put in to say this. She says, so I backed up and found her chat, and she said, did you meet Dr. Hal and Sidra Stone, Voice, Dialogue, and Psychology of the Cells? They worked in Mendocino for years. I found it the best work in psychotherapy world to integrate the split between psychotherapy and my love of India and ashrams. This is a brilliant conversation because this can bring in the best of all worlds when we are stuck.
Oh, good. I know I'm not familiar with those people. I'd love to hear more about it if I get a chance. We get a chance to talk sometime. So
they live up in, well, he's dead now. He worked with Jung, but he trained with Jung. But it's out of all the psychotherapy models that I've been interested in and have studied, they somehow managed to integrate the experiences I was beginning to have in India, but it wasn't really until I came to Vedanta, like you, that the whole thing comes together in a different way. I mean, the Vedanta brings it together, but I can't see how I would be where I am without the hard work I've done in therapy, because it helps me see my tendencies and my vasanas.
Yes, absolutely.
And without that work, I even recently, a whole new story came up recently, and I just thought, oh my God, here we go again. But I recognize,
but that's wonderful. I mean, it's discovering stuff. It's like an endless treasure hunt, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Keep going.
So, but they were remarkable. I mean, they probably the voice dialogue work is still going, and if anybody's interested, it really, really works with Vedanta. Good. Because it takes this whole idea that we are awareness, and everything else is just selves and parts of ourselves.
Yeah, good.
I'm so glad we're talking about this. This is the first time I've felt free to talk about my love of therapy.
Well, that's
what it's done for me.
Gabrielle, I think that's why Ram has opened this up, and I would have been willing to do this, is I think there's a lot of people that somehow aren't talking about it. And I think it's important to talk about because it enhances everything. Everything kind of goes together. And I even had Ram and I had a discussion because he ended up overriding me. It's on the site called non-dual psychotherapy. Now, here's my difference on this. I don't consider myself a non-dual psychotherapist. I consider myself a therapist who happens to be into non-dual spirituality, and I still differentiate the two because Vedanta is not psychotherapy per se, and psychotherapy is not Vedanta. Yeah. And so, but there's this way that the ideas can just work very well together. So anyway.
Yeah. Anyway, great. Thank you, Ram, and thank you, John, for doing the conversation.
Here, David says, I found safe container, this is in quotes, spaces I found in psychotherapy and good men's work very helpful. They enable me to see things in myself. I don't know, safe container, do you know that?
I'm assuming a safe space. It's just like you provide a safe space for spiritual discussions. It's like
Yeah.
you're non-judgmental, you're loving, you're all the things that make people feel comfortable and safe.
Yeah,
And
that's what Shining World is. We're trying to do
And-
that here. Just
well, and
make
that's
it-
what good therapists should do, right?
Yeah.
They should be, you should, because trust is, I mean, how can you place a value on trust? Once that's blown, it's everything's screwed up, right? So you got to be a trustworthy person. You got to provide a trustworthy environment, and you have to be willing to listen. I mean, really listen. That's not easy. I mean, when you still do, I suppose. I don't hear it so much on the ones you do online, but every seminar you started out is this. You got to have an open mind. Suspend your judgments. Just listen. The Manana Shravana thing. And, that's hard for people to do. We immediately want to take our understanding and overlay it on the new stuff, right? And
Yeah.
it won't, and it's hard to just say, because it's very hard to, I wrote that blog recently about open-mindedness. It's because you have to suspend your judgment. You have to have your ideas and the new ideas in your mind simultaneously, and not default back to your ideas. And that's uncomfortable for people. It's a very difficult thing to do. And so you're just in this kind of space where my old ideas don't work very well. My new ideas aren't very well formed. And I don't like this. There's a lot of uncertainty in that, a lot of, God, I feel like I'm on thin ice. And so you encourage people to do that. Every seminar I used to do, I did Trout Lake and Berkeley and this and that, you'd always lead off with that basic speech about, just don't make up your mind, really listen, really try to, suspend your beliefs, because it's so difficult to do. So
we got a couple more here, John.
yeah,
We said great conversation. Thanks for these stories. They reflect many of my own, and she's smiley face. Then Martin says, here's one, Martin. This is a little longer, but he says, Ishwar, the causal body creates by setting. This is what rules my life in a major way. Behavior, thoughts, and emotions are quite repetitive. I can face it. I can think it through, but I can't really work it out. So the free will is about setting up a different behavior, setting up different thinking, being dispassionate, but nevertheless, Ishwara still rules, doesn't it?
Well, if you're saying habits are hard to change, that's absolutely true, right? Everybody knows that. And Ishvar is the habit maker, so yeah. You're gonna struggle. I mean, so what? What else are you gonna do? I mean, you're gonna have to push back against some of this stuff, and it's not gonna be easy. And you're gonna naturally default into what's familiar. That's important. I mean, I don't want to underestimate. All of us develop these ways of being, the ways of thinking, and so forth, as a way of coping with life, right? And they've allowed us to survive and maintain some relative equilibrium and homeostasis. They've served a purpose. We're not going to give them up right away. They're hard to, because it's a survival deal, right? We've arrived at these things, however dysfunctional, as the best way we could come up with to deal with life. And so don't be too hard on yourself. Those things don't shift rapidly. They're designed not to shift rapidly, actually. They're designed to, provide a homeostasis that's kind of resistant to change. It's what we all experience, and
I'll tell you a story that's been bothering me for a while, and that is that, when you're old, you should grow old gracefully and take it easy and and die in your bed, comfortably in your bed at night. So you're not supposed to, and that's absolutely the wrong story to have. I need a whole new story, and my whole new story is, this is a bitch, man. I gotta just keep fighting all the time. I gotta keep moving every second, because because, you know, if I stop, this whole thing's just gonna grind to a halt. And I got to, so my whole thing is just, I'm busy like anything.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, even in the heat, I mean, I was out there building a compost cage. I built a really cool compost a cage, and it was hot as hell, and you know, and sweating like a dog. I'm just sweating, building this thing. I'll post a small video of it just to show you guys what the idea is. And so, you know, these stories are just, Ishwar is just supplying tons of them. And
Yeah.
you just have to question them and think, well, is this really the right story? Because it just sounds so nice. Well, I'll just kick back. I've worked hard. I've done
Yeah.
shining. Well, I've
Yeah.
done things, you know, I don't have to worry about money now. Everything's good. I'll just take it easy. And
Yeah.
it doesn't work.
The things Vedanta really changed my life. And if I'm conscious, the things are quite okay or working fine, but there are often things sneaking in unconsciously, and those are the repetitive things. For example, if I'm driving by car, I'm always thinking the same damn stuff. If I'm seeing a traffic light or something like that, it's annoying. That's annoying, really. I don't like it.
Good news is you're annoyed. Some people aren't. They just do whatever, you know.
Yeah, at least.
I didn't see the second page.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
so-
Ron, the same thing happened to me when you came at me with the oh, John, I think you need to write a blog, blah blah. Oh my God, I just retired. I don't know what I want to be lazy for a while. And
Yeah, that's right.
now you know.
Yeah, I give you this.
Then I thought, well, hell, now I'm pushed to kind of think about and try to refine my ideas about this. And I suppose what could be better than be challenged in that way?
Yeah.
You know, I didn't want to do it, but I said, oh God, I guess I'll just take this
No,
on.
I was kind of pushing you, but I was not too.
Yeah, you were.
I just say, okay, go ahead, never mind. You know, it's no big deal with this sort of thing.
Yeah.
Here, Susan loved it. She said, very interesting. Thank you, Dr. Baxter.
Mhm.
Sarita says, I found some binding vasanas and samskaras which I benefit from therapeutic approaches when negating them hasn't worked. So I found some binding which have she's benefited from therapy when she couldn't just negate them. So
Yeah, I mean,
and here, Avis, John, there's Avis is I think she's a doctor, a psychotherapist or psychologist.
Okay.
And she says, John, would you be willing to share your email for future conversations? Yeah, well, that's what this thing is about. This will be all, you can do this online. And
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I looked for the comment section. I don't know if Dave said he was going to put something on there on my blogs, but
I don't think
it doesn't have to be.
that.
What's that?
I don't think we got that technical part organized yet.
I haven't seen it either, but yeah, I think
Because I want to make a bunch of comments.
Yeah, go ahead, Ram. I don't know how this is going to evolve. Maybe we'll do some more Zoom things and let people participate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
because
We could even, have once a week something dedicated on a different day, maybe to the psychotherapy thing.
or if there's an interest, people, we might want to form a little subgroup with a conversation that's ongoing somehow.
Because we've got 12 blogs or 14 blogs now, and I want to make links in all those blogs to various Vedanta things and other questions, so we can expand it out. I think I just can sort of fantasize building a whole universe here. That could turn into a good book. That we could distill all this information into a good book, and then maybe even, and now I'm getting real aggressive, is take it to the psychotherapist guys, take it to their forums.
Yeah.
and you know, something that provocative to show that we actually know what we're talking about, that we're familiar with their world, and then we can see where where you know the benefits and the limitations of it, and maybe
Yeah.
we'll attract some more. You know, we can get some change going in that world. That
Yeah, see where it goes. I have one caveat I should add here, which is for me. I'm retired. I don't have malpractice insurance anymore. So I don't want to get drawn into conversations that are kind of like therapeutic, or people see me as they're kind of in that regard. I'll be glad to give people general advice with things, but I'm not going to operate in that capacity. So I don't want to have people come in with that expectation and let people down in that way. So just so you know.
yeah, that's definitely valid. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's see here, Martin. Let's see, Ramji looking. Susie says, looking. Thanks so much, Ram John. Looking forward to Trout Lake. Martin, there is a leave comment section on the blog. Oh, Martin says,
Oh, there is.
Susan,
Okay.
where is the blog? I'll send Susan the information on the blog later, Susan. Why do you think that some non-dual teachers, here again, why do you think some non-dual teachers claim there is no more work to do after moksha?
You don't understand non-duality.
Because they don't understand non-duality.
Well, it's the same people like Tony Parsons who say there's no world, there's no this and that. Of course, when you get to that great level of craziness, that's what they're going to say, right? It's like I don't know. I mean, you as a person continue to exist and have to operate in this world in some fashion. Not everybody can be Ramana and just sit on a bed and in their underwear, as you point out, Ram, so and even he had
Ramana had to sit in front of people in his underwear.
Yeah,
I have a friend who worked in the archives, and he used to it was highly controlled because the whole Ramana narrative is totally controlled. And he used to sneak out information from there and give it to me so I could see what was actually going on in Ramana's world at that time, because it's all documented. They have a huge archives there, and it's all air conditioned, and some guy gave $500,000 to build this place. It's really, and there's pictures of Ramana where you could see he was just hating it. He was just hating sitting there. He had the look of absolute disgust and contempt on his face with all these people staring at him in his underwear. So,
well, can you think of anything that's more arrogant than getting to a place where, you're this magic non-dual realm where you don't have any concerns or nothing that ever bothers you. It's the opposite, like you say, of non-dual. Non-dual is like, hey, you got good and the bad. It's all, you just accept it all as it is, right? You don't try to avoid it by, again, escaping into the stratosphere. But that's a lot of people's conception of what it means to be enlightened, as you know, right? Not a care in the world, never, so forth and so on. I don't know. I mean, you're more familiar with that than me, but I don't, that's not my understanding,
Here, Rudy says, thank you very much for the discussions, lecture, Dr. Baxter and Ramji, because they illuminate the Vedanta topics from the practical side and help us find ourselves in everyday life. So,
well, if it's not, if Vedanta is not good for everyday life, what the hell good is it for?
Yeah. That's our point. Yeah, it's like, hey, this is all about you, that being happy here and living a better life and enjoying yourself.
Otherwise, it's just a bunch of fancy spiritual ideas,
Yeah.
So Leonic says, I wish you have a subscribe button. We'll send this on your blog. You have such interesting articles.
Oh, thank you.
All the articles are up. So You're a
Hopefully they
star,
get better.
John.
Those first few ones are a little rough. I reread them recently because you posted the thing. Oh my God, I would have,
Well,
I
let's
think
go back.
hopefully they'll get better as time goes on.
No, we can just edit them. I go back and edit my satsangs.
Yeah.
You
Oh,
know, that's, I've got that book of satsangs. I sent you a thing.
Right,
I'm going,
right.
every day I go through 2 or 3 of those and I really re-edit them. I just bring
Yeah.
it up.
Well,
to
I
date.
mean, that may be something because I was looking
It's
at.
easy to do. It's easy to do.
Yeah. Okay.
So anyway, I'm sorry I made you put you in this position and made you famous.
Well, hopefully I won't.
Sorry, hasn't been sorry a day in his
I
life.
haven't been sorry a day in your life. Lisa just, you haven't been sorry a day in your life.
Got that right.
Yeah, all
No,
right.
it won't go to your head. That's the thing. That's the great thing. That's why I asked you, because you're a humble guy. And thank you very much. Interesting and inspiring, Martin. Okay, so I think
Okay.
we'll call our quits. Thank you again,
Good.
John, very much for.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Sundari
see
says
this goes.
thank you. She's enjoying it.
Yeah.
Yeah, the thank yous pouring in. So.
Oh, okay.
So we'll see you then.
Okay.
Well, we'll see you in Trout
Hey,
Lake.
2 weeks.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's coming up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. That'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, me too. It'll be a lot of fun. Getting a lot of interesting people coming and
Good.
hopefully we'll get some good weather.
Good.
So,
Good. Okay,
okay.
Thank you.
I'm signing off.
Yeah, God bless you all. Thank you,
Mhm.
everybody. Leonic, I noticed you're enjoying.
Many thanks.
We can
both
talk
of you.
about. You bet.
Okay,
Okay, good night.
bye-bye.
Good night.
Thank you.
Hi,
Thank you,
Cookie,
everybody.
Danielle, et cetera. Bye.
Bye.